This is terrible advice to give, and we have spoken to a number of women who've been given this advice in the form of you lack executive presence or you lack gravitas. Oh my gosh. Welcome to Powrup, the podcast that uncovers the unique challenges women leaders face today. Join your hosts Nat and Kristen as we dive into the tough topics and provide actionable insights you can apply right now. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any episodes. Hello, thanks for listening. Welcome to our 12th episode. At Powrsuit, we're committed to giving you the tools and the confidence to build a career on your terms. And in today's episode, we're giving you our usual unfiltered advice on the double-edged sword of executive presence.
I like that we have unfiltered advice.
I mean, it is. We have no one filtering our chitter-chatter.
No, we're not very good at filtering. Should we talk? Should I define executive presence?
Do it.
This is a term that is shrouded in mystery, in my opinion. And actually having a Google around, it's one of those things that you know when you see it, but you can't define it. Most of the time people don't define it. And I think that's always a problem, because when you have things that can't be defined until you see them, it probably means what you see is being very, very influenced by the norm. The status quo, and that probably means there's a very narrow definition of what executive presence looks like. And I found a really great quote from Forbes. The phrase executive presence for many conjures ease of authority, matter-of-factness, and emotional stoicism, traits that are often associated with white heterosexual men, which I think is just a really nice definition of the problem with the executive presence. What I understand it to be, and the purpose of it, is fundamentally it's your ability to inspire confidence. The definition of leader is that you need followers. So it is your ability to galvanize people to follow your vision, mission, plan, project, whatever it is. And I actually believe there are multiple ways to do that.
Yes, because the way you described it sounded really boring.
Yeah.
I thought, who wants to be in a meeting with stoicism? That sounds terrible. And one thing that's very clear when you Google it, there's like the 7 C's of executive presence, and it's things like charisma. Ooh. And I mean, there are some great ones, clarity and whatever. We'll chat about that soon. But there's things like calm and charisma. Those are masculine leadership traits.
I think George Clooney when I think charisma. Do you? Who do you think?
I can't embody George Clooney in a meeting. So
no.
I fail on all levels of executive presence.
But I do think when you hear those words like charisma, picture what comes up in your mind, or who comes up in your mind. They absolutely do, right?
Yeah.
And one
Obama.
of the notes I've taken is, Obama, is I've been looking, because we are talking about these different styles that women take to their careers. And so we've been looking at rom-com characters to try and find women in rom-coms who represent those styles. It is very hard to find examples of women in rom-coms who have executive presence, or who are even in positions where they should have executive presence. Whereas you could look at Top Gun, you could look at Wolf of Wall Street, you could look at all these movies and find men who ooze charisma.
Those aren't rom-coms though. Why?
True.
I don't even watch rom-coms.
Okay, maybe we'll widen our search.
Anyone listening to this podcast know I am the last person to speak on anything pop culture. So I rely on Nat to be the cool half of this relationship. But I totally get your point. We at Powrsuit want to change the face of leadership. And what that means is that in 10 years' time, the impact that we want to have is that people define and view and accept leadership and its many forms, which doesn't have to have a C title in it. It doesn't have to have those connotations of what a male leader is. So we genuinely want to change the face of leadership. That's what it means to us. And in the next 28 minutes, we're going to do a better job of describing what it means, the dangers of using that term, and how you can adapt executive presence in your life in a really healthy way. But first, did you learn anything from yourself last week?
Other than I like to video myself with an upwards angle that really highlights my neck to face join. Yeah. Merges it all into one. I challenged myself to listen to a new podcast called The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. Have you heard of it?
No.
So J.K.
But I've heard of
J.K. Rowling, much loved previously much loved writer of Harry Potter series, who got cancelled for being a TERF, which is, I can't even remember what that term means, but basically anti-trans.
Right.
And so this podcast has come out effectively telling her side of the story and trying to explain how she got where she got. And I'm only partway through, but what I have learned about myself is even when I have a very, very strong personal philosophy of getting outside of my thought bubble and really trying to keep an open mind and listen to different sides of the argument, because I do think it's extremely important in this day and age, it is extremely hard. Like, I'm having a mental battle with J.K. Rowling the entire time I'm listening to this podcast, and I have a counter argument to everything she says, and I hear myself, my internal dialogue going, yeah, but this isn't true. And that has been really a good reminder in, it's very easy to talk about being open-minded. It's much harder to put it into practice. So I'm going to stick with it, even though it's driving me bonkers and making me an angry person.
If you break, you could take to Twitter. She does reply. But good on you.
She might become a Powrsuiter.
Yeah. Good. Mine was, we went to an event. It was a tech event for the New Zealand startup ecosystem, and it was supporting tech founders and those in the tech industry with mental illness, because there have been some tragedies in the last few years, because there's so much stress related to founders in this industry, as we know. And so there was a boxing event to raise money, and everyday tech professionals put their hands up. They trained for months and months and months. We know some of them. We're going to give a shout out in this week's newsletter to one of the Powrsuiters that got in the ring. And I am competitive and I love sport. And so I was like, oh, I could train 4 months for this and get in a ring. And I can even get over getting punched in the face thing, because they literally got punched in the face.
A lot.
But where I drew my line, which I was like, oh, yep, so I'm still have some real issues with this, is I couldn't do it in front of 400 other people. There is not a chance, because every little mistake I would make, mental game is so important in sport. Mm-hmm. Every mistake I make, I would tear myself down because of the embarrassment in front of hundreds of people.
Fascinating.
I don't know what it says about myself, other than I still really care what people think about me.
Well, it says a lot to think you'd rather be punched in the face than be punched in the face in public. No, actually, I mean, I'm not joking. That's probably quite a common thing.
I think it's less about being punched in the face, but it's 4 months of forced exercise. I mean, these people looked ripped, and I'm sorry, but amazing. I will get punched in the face to get ripped. Okay, so what does that say about me? I learned a lot. But anyway, let's talk about executive presence. I think you did a great job of describing it, even though it sounded really boring. And I just wanted to tackle initially, this is terrible advice to give, and we have spoken to a number of women who've been given this advice in the form of, you lack executive presence or you lack gravitas. Oh my gosh. Gravitas. So let's chat a little bit. For me, when I hear that, it puts women in this penalty box of, you're not good enough, but without concrete feedback or communication as to why. It's this catch-all box, and it's almost like, I read a quote that it's like it's nailing Jell-O to the wall. It's impossible to nail down what it even means, and why it's terrible feedback is because it's intentionally vague. And I think it's intentionally vague because managers either haven't prepped to give really specific behavioral based or pattern based or constructive feedback, or they're too scared to give what they probably shouldn't be saying in the first place.
Or they actually have a bias, an unconscious bias, and do believe that the woman is not displaying leadership skills. Yeah. And because no one can quite put their finger on what executive presence is, other than George Clooney personifies it, it's very hard to give more specific feedback.
Yeah. How do you think they should relay it?
Well, one stat I found really particularly interesting this week is women receive 22% more feedback about our personalities than men do. So that, to me, feels like there is a very close correlation between these two things. And I suppose it ties back to me to that, what I was talking about last week with my limiting self-beliefs about being taken seriously. There's this whole area about being taken seriously and having that gravitas and personality-based feedback and the lack of specificity around it. Yes. One of the things I've been told, which was the most helpful thing that I've been told on the subject, and this goes back to leadership coach Jenny, Powrsuiter, incredible woman, co-founder of Excellent. when I was getting leadership coaching from her, she talked about one of the things I struggled with at the time is I would go into these big meetings and they especially were just being acquired. There were a lot of men who had, in quotation marks, executive presence to different degrees. And I just said, and I used a few coping mechanisms. I fell back on some really stupid ones like, excuse me, is this a dumb question? Or kind of being afraid to put my hand up, or actually just walking out and feeling quite miserable about it. And she said, isn't this interesting? Because the problem for you is actually you walk into that room and you don't think you deserve to be there. Somewhere you think you do not belong there. Right. Whereas all those men walk in, even if they don't belong there, they all believe they do. Yeah. And so for me, that was probably the most specific feedback around how to fix executive presence, is actually tackle the underlying problem, which for me, which I imagine it is for a lot of women, is a confidence one. It is or an imposter syndrome thing. And I mean that almost in the purest sense of the word, that I was an imposter in those meetings. I didn't belong in those meetings. I didn't belong in that environment. It wasn't right for me. Yeah. And that led me to feel and behave differently than how I would had I been really confident being there.
That is an amazing piece of feedback and really helpful, because you could then interrogate it, look at it, and possibly do something about it, rather than just this term of, oh, you just need to have more of it. We are going to post, we've written an article on how to give good feedback and receive it. In fact, we can post both of those in the resources below, because we've got some great tips on, often the focus is on the personalities as opposed to the leadership behavior. So really helpful things that I've heard or experienced before is, you could do more of this, like a behavior, and you could do less of this. That's really fantastic and concrete. Also factual, not interpretive. And that is when you get into the biases, is like, I'm interpreting you as this. That's our lens that we see of the world and that how we view things. It's not necessarily factual. So often focusing on patterns of, I notice when you get stressed in meetings, this might happen. I've noticed this. Better, it's much more useful than a one-off. And then also link it to impact. For example, Nat, if I was to give you feedback in that space, which by the way, I think you smashed it and I never would have known in any of those meetings you felt that way, but it might have, I'm just making up a hypothetical here, but Nat, you could do more of getting to the point quite quickly. You could do less of laughing after your point. And the linking to impact is, it's really powerful when you speak and stop and then you're silent or something like that. That probably wasn't a great example, but I'm trying to just quickly off the top of my head link to concrete feedback that you could then go, oh, the next time I have an inclination to do this, I'm just going to stop.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, I so agree with that. I think that takes it away from this big, lofty, mysterious executive presence into... And actually this is a challenge for leaders as well when you are giving that feedback, which is exactly what you just said, to really challenge your own initial feedback. Like when you're watching someone and thinking there's something that's not quite fitting or it doesn't feel right in this room, really spend the time and the work digging into why. Is it my own bias? Is it that there's just this one little behavior they're doing? Is that behavior actually acceptable? It's just that it's not the white male version of doing it. And should I should I encourage that behavior more? Should I create more space for that behavior? Or is it something like saying, sorry, stupid question, that actually we should just all cut and stop doing?
Yeah. It's interesting that it is effectively a lose-lose. There are really bad connotations around it. It doesn't place a very specific measuring stick on our behavior. And what it ends up focusing on, like you said, quite often is the pitch of our voices. I know in my 20s, I made a really conscious effort to lower my voice. And I think I spoke about that in another podcast. And that's insane. It gives this connotation that women are shrill. Things like personal presentation. I think we should chat about this a little bit, because we are going to go into 3 tips, practical tips of executive presence, because presence is really important. Let's maybe drop the executive.
Maybe we just call it building your leadership. Your leadership style.
Building your leadership. I don't mind presence, because it is how you show up.
Nice.
And
building
how
your
received.
leadership presence. Great. And it can look different for everyone, as it should.
We should chat just very briefly about these standards of women, and because part of presence is how we look, all these cues we give off, the outfits we wear, the nails that we do, the hair, the makeup, and there's a huge pushback and movement away from that. Any thoughts? Because it's still important to be respected and well received, but do we need to have as many cues historically as we've had?
I find this is a can of worms
Yeah.
amongst many cans of worms. And I remember there was a breakfast show, I think it was in Australia, where the male host didn't change his suit. I want to say weeks or months.
Yeah.
He didn't mention it. He just did his little own experiment where he turned up every day wearing the same thing and not one person called it out. And so he eventually made a point to say, if my co-host, who is a woman, changes one thing about her appearance, we get floods of feedback. No one even noticed. It's such a terrible double standard. I think even when we talked about Powrsuit as a name, there were a few women who immediately felt quite triggered by this idea of, I have to wear this suit and these heels, and it
shoulder
really
pads.
did hark back their emotional connection to this way that they had to present themselves felt very confronting, which was quite a light bulb moment for us. We're obviously redefining the Powrsuit to be whatever you feel good in. So I think this is a really nuanced area. My other belief on this is the person who dresses the worst is the person who is in the most powerful position, because they don't have to care what anyone else thinks. And you actually notice it quite a lot in tech. The people who are wearing the suits and ties are often the people who are in lower level positions.
Yeah.
So I think there is a whole can of worms around this. But I do think you should go to whatever you're going to feeling really confident, really good about yourself, and it should be appropriate to the situation.
Yes.
And that is where the can of worms opens,
Yeah,
because
true.
I don't know what appropriate should be defined as. But I do know what I might change. Like, I probably wouldn't wear ripped jeans
Yes.
to a sales meeting.
Yeah.
Can I tell you why not? Probably not. Is it a structural issue? Probably. But maybe it's a respect thing.
Yeah.
But then the respect can go too far, that I shouldn't have to wear heels to that same meeting because it's what's expected. So
Yeah,
there's a line somewhere.
Those are societal norms, and how cool that coming out of COVID that we no longer, that isn't a pressure point anymore, because it was. And if we're getting up on stage or talking Nat, or we're getting into a room, that is actually, society is now accepted, that we don't have to do that. Yes, sneakers. Sneakers are a thing. So to close off on the feedback piece, if you're a manager, please be specific with your women, because studies have shown that men get really specific feedback, and we need specific feedback to advance in our careers. Women get really subjective feedback, and we don't know what to do with it, which means we're not improving, which means we're kind of in a downward spiral, really, because there are no behaviors can change as a result of it. Therefore, their views of us continue to get negative, and it could be a downward spiral. So if you're nervous about giving specific advice, it's possibly because it's inappropriate. Check your bias.
Well, and one easy way to do that, just to quickly butt in there, because we are in our newsletter this week, we're talking about how to respond to microaggressions, sexist remarks in the workplace. And the easiest way, in my opinion, to pick whether or not it's an appropriate thing to say is reverse it. So if I was about to say to Kristen, oh, I really think you should show less shoulder at work, would I say the same thing to a man? And if I wouldn't say it to a man, I probably shouldn't say it to a woman.
Great.
And that's just such an easy rule to live by. Just literally play it out in your head. If you were to say the same thing to a 50-year-old white man, if that would go down very badly, it will go down equally as badly with the woman you say it to.
Couldn't agree more. And then the second tip on that, on the feedback, is to keep it really specific. Focus on do more of, do less of, focus on behaviors, link it to impact, so we have that aha moment that goes, oh, I'm making people feel this way, or I'm being received this way, because we want to be received in the best light, and sometimes there are blind spots. And so let's dig into how to master leadership presence, because it is important. And we've come up with 3 little tips, and under the headings of, the first is be you, the second is have conviction, and the final one is tailor how you show up, which you alluded to a little bit there. Start with the be you. Do you want to, what does that mean to you?
Well, this is coming from someone who feels like they're not taken seriously.
Yeah.
No, actually, I've made this is one of those, what we actually ran a workshop last week for Powrsuit, which was very exciting.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest light bulb moments that came out was our best traits are also our biggest work on. So it's just the 2 different ends of the scale. So for me, one of the things that I think is one of my best traits is that I actively question most things and decide proactively how I want to turn up. And so I have always had very we talked about last week. We both started out quite young, going into situations where we were often the only one. And I made a pact with myself very early on to show up being myself. And every now and again, I've wobbled on that. But I've always gone in, had a good time, been loud, been confident, and been myself, and known that if I'm not accepted in that situation, then that is not a situation I should be in. So the comment I said before about going into these meetings, it wasn't a situation I should be in. It wasn't my vibe. It wasn't where I wanted to be. That's okay. I'm happy to leave that situation. And I did. So I think there's that. But what that can sometimes do is you get a reaction to that. And if you get that reaction enough, or if you get those little micro reactions enough, you start questioning yourself. So I think it's a balance with that.
And I think we're moving into a time in the world, thankfully, where we can bring our whole selves to work. And what does that mean? There's probably still, there are the, you know, you might not want to bring all your personal baggage to work, but it could mean that you bring your identity to work and your quirks and your whole you, be it, you know, sexual orientation or your cultural backgrounds and beliefs, and you can bring those into work and be really proud of those. But also as a woman, we don't have to be like men, authentically ourselves. We tend to have more warmth than empathy. We can show that in meetings. It's okay. We can have the tone of voice that we want. We can have humor or wit. I'm not a humorous person, so I can't use it, but studies have shown.
I'm hilarious. Aren't you going to do a comedy show in the metaverse?
That's why I said it, because it's the exact opposite of what I excel at. But humor has shown that women display it are received really well. So if you've got it, use it. Don't cram that part of you, you know, deep down inside. I think it's okay to authentically show up as yourself. Or
I
that
agree.
would be weird.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
And one thing, probably a challenge for Powrsuiters, because we do want to create an environment that is diverse, and that doesn't just mean white women or women who look like you or women who behave like you, is to get really curious about how other women might show up and make space for that and support them. So if there is a woman who is operating outside of a stereotype that you might have, really check, oh, wait a second, this might be a bias that I have.
Yeah.
And then really make a point of celebrating that and really trying to step in and be excited about it. Because I think that's something that as Powrsuiters, that is one structural change we can actually impact by creating space, supporting and proactively encouraging people to bring themselves to work, even if it looks different from how we would do it.
Absolutely. For each person, we can go through a bit of a self-awareness exercise to really identify what is authentically me. And it kind of is like, what is your personal brand at work? What are you known for? How are you accepted at work? How do you want to be at work? And, you know, how do you want to come to work and present yourself? So could take a little bit of self-awareness and thinking, like, what are the things that are really important to me? But also self-awareness in some of the weaknesses we might have. For example, I might be too dominant in a meeting and state things as a fact as opposed to a question or be curious about it. So self-awareness is really important when you're going through that be you stage of what is me and how do I want to show up and what are some of my superpowers, but what are the weaknesses that I have to be aware of, and just be super conscious of them.
Or work-ons.
Work-ons. Yeah. And the second one is have conviction. And we had a little bit of a conversation about this beforehand, but it's this idea of if you are in a meeting to convey an idea, or you would like to convey an idea, you have expertise in the area, you have a strong opinion, you want to be heard, you want your voice heard, convey it with conviction. And there's ways to do that. And there's something with clarity of the messaging and really thinking, and this will involve prep before the meeting. What are the key things that you want to get across? How are you going to clearly communicate them? It could be that you start with the main point up front and then have supporting evidence behind what you're saying. It could be, so there's a sense of this clarity with messaging and concise, because human brains can only focus for a short amount of time. And if you're going on and on and on, you're going to lose the power of that conviction.
Yeah. And we do, not we as women, but people tend to overtalk when we're nervous. And one of the most powerful things you can do.
Or when they want to convince others. It's like, if I just talk more.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason we talked about this beforehand, and it's worth noting because I feel very strongly, especially if we're talking about executive presence, that the last thing we want to do is perpetuate existing structures that don't work. So one of the things about speaking with conviction is that is actually quite a masculine trait and often used when it shouldn't be. So if you don't actually have the answer, I strongly believe we should normalize saying that and asking and saying, I don't know, because that's a part of being an empathetic leader is not having to have all the answers, which then leaves you with some really clear things going back to being yourself, things that you can add value on, things that you are an expert on. Get your case together, get your supporting evidence and convey it that way. And then you can actually bow out or be curious about other things without having to step into the fray and add your opinion to a pile of other opinions that probably are all incorrect.
Or they're just repeats of others. And that's what I first noticed in those early days of my 20s as I was naturally learning by observing. And I just found it so interesting watching all these people, and quite often the next person who wouldn't have an original thought or anything to add would just repeat what the previous person and I was like, oh, this is kind of easy to master because they're just repeating what others are saying. So a few tips that I learned was I have absolutely been in situations where I've probably been asked to the meeting because they wanted me to be in the know, or possibly I could have had something to add. And there have been times where I've genuinely had nothing to add for various reasons. So I remember just taking a really active listening role. I was curious, I learned, and the only way I felt I could add value, or I did add value, was I might speak to a personal experience. So I might not know about that in a work context or have deep research or analysis on the matter, but I might just say, this is what I've seen, or this is what I've experienced, or I remember a time when. And often storytelling is kind of interesting because it's your unique perspective and it's your unique opinion.
Well, and I love that example. We literally heard one this morning about an organization that may lack a little bit of diversity, and there was this setup that they'd created of this giant barbecue outside on this deck, and how great was it? And this woman walked in and immediately went, no woman would have this outside their house looking like this. And that, from a personal perspective, is gold.
Yes.
That perspective is gold just for that.
Yeah.
Because, and so that's not expertise, that is just a different perspective, which is extremely valuable.
Yes, and conviction is dropping the qualifier. So you might not say, "Ooh, I don't know about this, everyone." It could literally be like, in my experience, or I can't think of anyone who would want that in their backyards, as an example. And so I think we can drop the I thinks, and I think we can drop. I wonder if we can drop qualifiers, which leads to the last really powerful point around conviction, and that is your body language. In our tips, in meeting tips, which will also be in the resource, we talk about how body language is 95% of communicating. And if you want to show conviction, there's some really confident things you can do with your body. Like what, Nat?
I really liked who was I listening to yesterday? It was a podcast. It's a podcast of a friend, a Powrsuit. I should know which one. 7% of what we convey is the words. That's it.
Well, I just said 95% is body language.
But
our math isn't working here. You have to drop it to
93% is non-verbal, I think, is the correct stat there, because people call us out on our incorrect stats or our flippant use of stats. 93% is non-verbal, and I think that is such a powerful stat because words, if you're typing something, if you're emailing something, that is only going to convey 7% of the message. So body language, interesting. The casual lean back in a chair, but like the confident lean back. I don't want to throw you under the bus, Kristen, but I'm definitely a fidgeter. Terrible. Don't fidget.
Yeah.
Stop fidgeting.
Yes.
Stop picking your nails. Stop. I could do all those stupid things. And
we are fidgeters. You were trying to kindly say we are fidgeters. We
are fidgeters. And that is not good. I mean, it just makes you look nervous, even if you're not nervous. We had an incredible professional speaking coach speak to us a while ago, and they said, if you're speaking in public, don't take a piece of paper along because your little hand tremors from your nerves will have this paper shaking.
So have your pad of paper, have your notes, have your pad of paper down. If you have your shoulders hunched right now and you say, I am amazing, versus now try
breaking my back, putting
rolling
my
your shoulders back, chin up, I am amazing. It's incredible how just your body alone, that physical shift, can create conviction in your messaging and in your presence in a meeting, and you can look quite well, I don't know, charismatic without being charismatic. Just my
gravitas. I never know what to do with my hands. I'm fine when I'm sitting, but when I'm standing, it's probably why I like a glass of wine in my hands. As soon as you start paying attention to your hands, you're like, where do I put them?
Take notes, clasp them, hide them under the table.
I hide mine under the table because then I can fidget and no one can see.
Oh, great. Well, we're going to finish off on tailor how you show up. And you had spoken to it. And this is because you said the ripped jeans. I mean, we just don't. Could be societal, but I think there are cues as to how formal or informal the meeting is. And leadership presence is about reading the room, reading the audience, how you want to be perceived. Unfortunately, we still judge people based on initial appearances, and that's not going to go anytime soon. So I think just have an understanding of how formal, how informal is this, and go for gold with the sneakers. But you might want to brush your hair, Nat.
I actually did brush my hair before I came here, but I didn't brush it for a meeting earlier.
But to be fair, you kind of knew that was an informal one.
Well, and that's the thing is you sort of pick your audience. I had a good piece of advice a while ago when we spoke to the negotiation experts. Yeah. And he said, if you're going into a job interview in a bank, you'll probably dress quite differently than if you went to a job interview for a tech startup.
Facebook, you wear a hoodie.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there is that, it's that paying respect to the situation while being yourself. And I think that another great quote, we've been reading so many quotes this week, is it doesn't take any longer to dress in an outfit that makes you feel confident. Yeah. And I really love that. If you go in feeling confident and appropriate and yourself, you are going to nail it. Yes. When you go in feeling disheveled or your outfit doesn't really fit or it doesn't feel appropriate for the situation, you just, that confidence will show through. Yeah. It's always better to overdress than underdress as well, in my opinion. I love an overdresser.
Yeah, you always look smashing, Natalie.
This is me in my activewear and my holy socks.
One last plug would be for our very first episode ever, which was negotiation and how you present yourself in a negotiation. We have one of the C's, which is clarity, and that's actually about leaving the baggage at the door, coming in confidently, and should the emotion level rise, have some ways to regulate your emotions in the meeting, because emotional outbursts, which I have done in meetings, probably aren't ideal and won't help you land that really important opinion or behavior or project or pitch that you want to land. So there is a little bit of emotional regulation and clarity involved in that, and having the power to kind of, again, be self-aware.
And then I'd say the final point on that is have a read of our newsletter this week. The article will be up on Powrsuit.com on how to deal with microaggressions in the moment, because that can quite often throw you in a meeting, and it is much harder to figure out how, or wherever you are actually, when you sort of walked in feeling confident, you've honed your leadership style, you feel like you are who you are, and then someone drops a, oh, sweetheart, go do this, or smile more, or whatever it is, it can really knock you. So having a few comebacks in your back pocket and a few ways to deal with it in the moment, that can really give you a bit of a confidence boost as well.
So check out Powrsuit.com. If you're not signed up to our newsletter yet, you should sign up and get that, but you can find the article there. To quickly end off, Nat, you get one sentence. What's something that's exciting you about Powrsuit at the moment?
We are getting over the hump. And what happens in a startup is you initially get all your friends and friends of friends and family on board. And so you have this really early initial success, and then you hit strangers and you can flounder. We've shot past that, and now we're getting comments, messages, feedback from people we've never met before, which is so exciting. That was about 12 sentences.
I forgive you.
I'm not a rule follower.
Mine in a similar vein is we have some male allies, and we've got some fantastic men that not only are reading our newsletter, but sharing the love and with their partners and friends and colleagues. And a little shout out to Bruce, who came up to me at a party and is the #1 fan of our podcast. So loving our male allies. That's something to be excited about.
If you'd like to take Bruce on and become our #1 podcast fan, Give us a 5-star rating.
Please do. We'd love your love. Connect with us on socials and do that, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.
Bye.